Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Kunal, your host, and today we have a very special guest joining us from DC, Angela Greiling Keane, who is the managing editor of States at Politico. You've held numerous positions at Politico, so that's very cool, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a couple of them during the course of the interview. You spent nearly a decade at Bloomberg News as not only a WhiteHouse correspondent during the Obama administration, but also a reporter. So we're definitely going to hit that because I was too young to pay attention to politics at that age. And you were also the president of the National Press Club in 2013. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. I can understand you're very busy, but I do appreciate it.
It is great to be here and excited to talk about all of these things. Young audiences are an important part of what all journalists do today. So excited to talk.
Definitely. All right, so let's get into this. First question, pretty basic. Talk a little bit about your background. How you got into the journalism and media space. Touch on how college and your college education, any higher education, impacted your career. And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, well, I've been a journalist for about 25 years. So, reporter for the first 20 years, and then I've been an editor in the 6 years that I've been at Politico. So, I decided when I was a little kid that I wanted to be a reporter. And, why does any little kid decide something? I guess I was like 10 or 11, and I like to write. I like to ask questions. I was curious about things. So, being a reporter seemed like the perfect job for me, and I stuck with it. So when I was decided on college, I knew I wanted to study journalism. So I picked the University of Missouri, which has a great journalism program then, still does now. It served me well. It was a very practical education, got to spend a semester reporting in Washington. So I got that bug at a young age. And I've worked in many jobs, but I've worked in Washington ever since. So I've done a lot of different things. I've worked at newspaper, magazine, wire service, and now digital first publication, covering always something that's like Washington or Washington adjacent, but a lot of different things. So I covered transportation. I've covered local news for an audience somewhere else. Like you mentioned in the introduction, at Bloomberg, I spent a few years as a WhiteHouse correspondent. And then at Politico, the job that I have now is running our states team. So we are about 50 journalists, primarily outside of Washington, but covering state capitals and then a couple federal policy areas. So it's a job that's never boring, and you really have to pick among all the exciting news that we could be covering any given day.
Okay. No, that sounds very cool. And I actually want to get right into that, which is kind of talk about your time. Let's start in the past. Talk about your time in the Obama White House. What was that like? I wish I could have, been more cognizant then of what was going on, but I'm always, happy to learn. I want to hear the war stories or any, and then discuss your time with Politico right now as managing editor of States.
Yeah, well, I covered near the end of the Obama administration, so you
Okay.
probably were paying attention by that point, even if
Okay.
not early in its
Okay.
first term. So I covered the White House from 2014 to 2016.
Okay.
An interesting time. There were definitely some highlights. I would say one of them was the travel in general was really interesting when you're with the pool, the traveling press pool with the president. You literally go everywhere with him. And when I was at Bloomberg, we had a number of reporters covering the beat, so it wasn't like any one reporter was with the president all the time. That would be too much. But I did get to travel a lot, and so I was in the room when Obama met Raul Castro, the Cuban president, the first time that a U.S. leader had met a Cuban leader since the embargo in the late 1950s.
Yeah.
So that was a really, really cool moment of history to like literally witness in the room. I was in the room when he sang Amazing Grace in South Carolina after the mass shooting in the church there. And it was just an incredibly moving moment to be there. You knew as you were there that it was history to have the first Black president in a situation like that, controlling the crowd by singing "Amazing Grace." So, like you are the first draft of history and things like that. And it is your job to write it, to express it, for a way that your audiences can understand the import of the events.
Mhm.
The White House beat, though, there's obviously lots of great parts. It's also to beat where lots and lots of journalists are covering it. So one of the downsides is it's a little harder to like zig from the crowd. You're writing the news of the day, you're writing the big stories, and that's exciting. But I actually find some of the other beats that I've had to be more impactful because you can really write stories, you can dig in and write things that other people aren't writing and illuminate things that might not be illuminated if you weren't there to tell those stories.
Yeah, and I guess now at your time at Politico, you obviously have to deal with numerous amount of issues happening in every state and how that correlates to
Not every state. We're in 6 states,
in
but
six
still, yeah,
Yeah, and
6
kind of
important.
yeah, talk about that experience and some of the key takeaways you've seen in how do I describe like a very polarized time? Like
Mhm.
how has that impacted your job?
Yeah, it impacts it a lot. One of the ways it impacts is like ugliness on social media.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's something that every year it's more polarized, and one of the ways that manifests is by people not believing facts and
Right.
people lashing out on social media, attacking journalists. Journalists are easy to find on social media, and so we editors occasionally, more so reporters, because they're the ones with the bylines, become targets, and that can be very unpleasant. It's definitely one of the ways that that the current polarization shows itself in the lived experiences of journalists. But I think one of the guiding principles to what we do is it's more important than ever to have fact-based information. Politico is a nonpartisan news outlet, and proudly so. We don't take sides. We're not pro one party or another. We do tough reporting on any politician, regardless of their political party. And I think that that's needed now more than ever when increasingly much of the media is taking one side or another, and people are choosing to get that sort of information.
Yeah. And I guess what are your thoughts on just beyond the sphere of just reporting and I guess now we're dealing with free speech and
Mhm.
First Amendment rights, right? What are your thoughts on political polarization in the United States as a whole? There have been many key moments in history where we don't really know what the next chapter is going to look like. And I've been told that this is one of those moments. We are in one of those years and decades where we don't know what the next phase is. And you having the responsibility of kind of disseminating information. What are your thoughts on this age that we live in?
Yeah, it definitely feels like one of those moments. And, you're a Gen Zer and it's your first time with one of those moments, but I'm a Gen Xer and there's an entire generation in between of millennials. And it's still the first one of those moments for millennials or Gen Xers. We don't remember. I was born after Watergate.
Okay.
I didn't live through the civil rights movement in the 60s. Like those were moments also, but they predate like the vast majority of the population that's alive today. So it is a really interesting time, and I think an important time to be a journalist. I think that the challenge, one of the challenges, there's many that we face, is reaching audiences that need information. There's obviously lots of people come to Politico for their news. They come to lots of other news outlets, and that's great. But how do we keep reaching harder to reach audiences, people who may not have as much access to information? News is, I think, increasingly less accessible to people who don't choose to find it. There's many people consume lots of news. Most of us live with news alerts and constant information, and there's lots of people that live like that, but there's lots and lots of other people that like willfully choose to not follow the news, to not know what's going on, and that sort of choice to not know, I think, can be dangerous and increases polarization. So one of the challenges that newsrooms, not only ours but including ours, face is how do we find those audiences? How do we break through to people who should know what's going on?
Yeah. And I guess more recently, yesterday, I was browsing Twitter, and Twitter just got bought, actually.
Mhm.
Um, And I was funny because I was trending on Twitter while I was watching. I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." What are your reactions to things like that? Where obviously, even Politico has a huge following on a social media website like Twitter. Many other news agencies do. I personally go there for my information on day-to-day politics in different states and politicians and following them. So what do people think when Twitter is privatized as social media?
Right. Well, our first thought is, what stories do we write? Yeah, we have a list of we wrote a bunch of stories yesterday. We wrote a bunch more stories today. We're going to write a bunch more stories tomorrow. There's so many political implications to the Elon Musk buying Twitter
Right,
story. One of the questions, like if you look at Google search trends today, one of the questions that everyone's asking is Trump going to get back on Twitter? We don't know,
right,
but we want to write about that. What are the implications if he does, if he doesn't? In the meantime, he started a rival social media network. Like, what does this mean for that? That's
right,
a big question.
right.
And then one of the stories for Politico with Musk buying Twitter is Twitter a couple years ago decided to stop selling political ads to have those on their platform.
Mhm.
So will Musk allow political ads again? If so, that's very interesting. And what sorts of consultants want their political clients to be advertising on Twitter? Like, all of those storylines are really big for us in terms of how we use Twitter to expand our audience and disseminate our news. I don't think anything changes in the short term on that, but if there's less content moderation, that kind of thing, if Twitter becomes an uglier place, then we certainly rethink. You may have seen the news just in the last week or two about the New York Times encouraging their journalists to dial it back on Twitter. In the past, they had encouraged their reporters to have a robust presence on Twitter, and now they're not saying that they can't or shouldn't, but they're saying, hey, let's not make Twitter quite the priority that it used to be. Maybe spend a little more time doing other things. So I think that may be the tip of an iceberg of that sort of trend that may have happened regardless of Twitter becoming a privately held company.
Yeah. No, definitely, I was starting to get a following on Twitter. I'm almost at 200 followers, so it's very personal to me.
Progress.
No, it's just something to think about. I never thought that you could privatize the social media. I mean, well, obviously other social media companies are privatized, but I never thought it would hit Twitter, where I go for my daily dose of political information and read articles. And um, it's going to be interesting to see how free speech is moderated now. But that's just a complete side note. To get a little bit back on track, I want to ask, how do two agencies, and you kind of touched on this before, but how do news agencies like Politico um, try to report accurate, unbiased, like you said, nonpartisan information? And is it like, I'm sure Politico does opinion editors and many op-eds and
We'd only do a little bit of
yeah,
op-ed. We have Politico magazine, which is
right,
a digital only product that's part of our website, but
right,
they have they do run a small amount of op-eds, and
right,
then we have a couple columnists who do get to write their opinion. But everybody else of the 500-ish journalists at Politico, the rest of us do not get to have any sort of political opinions in our work.
right. And so again, I guess the question remains: how do you, in a world where it's really hard to filter what is facts and what is quote fake news, like how does a large news agency like Politico juggle that thought?
Yeah. For one thing, we are very careful in our hiring. So we want journalists who want to be non-biased, impartial journalists.
Right,
We don't hire people who are looking to push the news one way or another, or to have a personal opinion in their work. There's plenty of places that people can work if that is what they want to do in journalism, but Politico is not that place. So we start out by that, and we definitely look at people's social media and so forth when we're hiring someone. We want to make sure that they're not out there, tweeting so and so politician is great or is terrible, or like anything that would smack of an opinion. We don't want that in their online presence. So we start with who we hire, and then we have a rigorous editing process. So Any story that is sensitive or a bigger investigative piece goes through many layers of editing. And among the things that we look at are, any hints of bias. Are we using the right word choices? Are we being accurate and careful in our word choices? There are things that are facts. The election was not stolen in 2020. That's a fact. Biden won. The Electoral College.
I hope that's a fact.
Uh,
Yeah.
so we don't we don't take both sides of something when one side is not true. But we certainly believe that there's multiple sides to a normal political argument, something that's not that's an abortion. There's
Like
lots of different.
policy-oriented.
Absolutely. COVID vaccination requirements, things that are very controversial, but there's not like a right and a wrong in terms of a fact-based thing. Like things that are opinion, we do want to present something that is balanced, not necessarily balanced like half and half, but we always want to include a paragraph in a story that we call a to be sure paragraph. What does the other side say? What might be the opposite view to the people that we're writing about? We always want to make sure that we're challenging our own assumptions too. Journalists live in the world that they live in, and anybody is influenced by their own lived experience. So we want to make sure that we're including a diversity of voices in the types of people that we quote, that we are challenging ourselves. If we assume something, we want to make sure that we're not part of the groupthink and get outside our own bubble as well.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. I want to follow that up and ask, I think the real issue, like the average American deals with, especially when they're watching news, is nowadays it's dubbed like misinformation, and struggling to find, like, I struggle to find sources that are reliable, and I take my personal time to like fact check and go multiple websites, not just focusing on just one. And of course, I'm also on Twitter, but let's see how that changes. Like, I'm always trying to find a variety of diverse information so that I can form my opinion. The question is, how does Politico deal with these raging thoughts of misinformation and kind of a public distrust of not only media but also government?
Right. I mean, like back when I was covering the Obama White House, to go back to that time period, in 2014 to 2016, one of the things I noticed was like I had all these new followers on Twitter, and they were like tweeting all these political things, and I was like, who are these people? Like, why do they have so much time to sit there and tweet these political things? And it didn't take too long, well, I mean, a couple of years, to realize that a lot of those quote unquote people were actually Russian bots,
Right.
sowing disinformation, sowing like seeds of discord in the United States. So I, like many people, took a minute to wake up to that. But in terms of now, with sources that we use, we always, want to be careful with who we trust. At Politico, we tend to quote people who are either in power or seeking power. It might be an elected official, it might be a staff person, it might be the next AOC who's running for office and challenging the longtime incumbent. But we, with quoting those sorts of sources, that's just what we do at Politico. It insulates a little bit from like finding an expert who's not actually an expert. Just the sort of journalism we do, there's a little bit less of that worry of being duped by somebody who isn't who they say they are. That being said, we work hard at verification of all sorts of information. If we get a tip, we aren't going to be quick to publish some sort of salacious tip without serious reporting to check it out, to make sure that the image we've been sent is verifiable, to make sure that the document that we have is actually real. Those are the sorts of things that we do spend a lot of time verifying and reporting, and not just trusting the first thing that comes along.
Yeah, no, I think that whole logistical process, I mean, I have no insight to that. So thank you. It's not that I question Politico or any other news agency. It's just that at this point, it's really hard to make a very objective assessment of information.
Right.
It's not just something I struggle. Everybody these days is having a hard time. It's difficult.
And journalists by nature are skeptical people.
Right.
People that go into the field are people that ask questions and don't just necessarily trust what you're told. So that sort of personality makes you ask questions and get to the bottom of things rather than just like believe the first thing you're told.
Yeah. I mean, I trust that not only my mentors, but like folks that are in my inner circles provide reliable information. And I trust that Politico reports reliable information because we read it and we discuss it. And so I guess in some ways, thank you for the work you do. And I hope to see you continue it. Now, I always like to end the show. The show and the podcast is about voting rights and civic engagement and kind of finding this way to incentivize and in some ways encourage folks to get out there and vote. And a lot of the times it impacts many of the things that you at Politico report. And so I want to ask, what is your advice to Gen Z? I don't know where they coined that term, but I just go with it. To make an impact not only where we are, but how we read our news, and how we trust the information that's given to us.
Yeah, I would say, be informed, like choose to seek information. I talked a little bit earlier about people who choose to not seek information. Don't be those people. There's no necessarily right or wrong way as to how you get information. Push alerts on your phone and Twitter, and you can get your news from TikTok. The Washington Post has a very, very good TikTok feed. Nothing wrong with that. But choose to find information, to seek out, to ask questions. If you see something on Twitter that seems like too good to be true or nobody's else reporting it, like question that. If there's a huge news event and only one Twitter account or something is reporting it, like maybe that's not true. Be the skeptical news consumer as well. But be a news consumer. Spend time, and I would say like vary your media diet. There's plenty of people that just watch one TV network or go to one social media site or curate their tweet deck in a way that only amplifies the views that they already hold. Like don't live in an echo chamber. Read op-eds that are contrary to what you believe. See what the other side believes and why they believe it. It may help strengthen your beliefs, but it also
Or
will
in
like help you understand other people.
Right, and in some cases, I watch the other side just for some comedy in my life
Mhm.
because it's honestly a satire at this point. But yes, no.
But understand them. But the best people in politics and the best people in journalism like really try to understand both sides of an issue, even if try to understand Trump and where he's coming from, that he believes the election is stolen, and why do so many people believe that he believes the election was stolen. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is very interesting. No, but no, thank you so much for the advice. I want to ask, this is a time where you get to advertise a little bit yourself. Shout out your Twitter handle. I mean, if you'd like,
Yes.
where folks can follow you, and of course, Politico. I can put that in the description as well.
Yes, please. I'm at A Greiling Keane.
Cool.
So AGREILINGKEANE, with a unique last name. I get to have that handle with with my name. I tweet about the work that we do at Politico. I tweet occasionally about press freedom, occasionally about sports.
That's good.
But great place to find me. And then, of course, politico.com is our free site. We love to have readers of all stripes. We put up great stories every day. We put up more long reads on the weekend. So come on the weekend for the great magazine stories and the investigative pieces, and then sign up for our newsletters. We have a number of free newsletters under the Playbook brand. So we have National Playbook, and then we have playbooks in 6 states that are on my team. So if you're in California, Massachusetts, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, or Florida, and you want to follow the politics of that state, sign up for that state playbook. They're free newsletters, and they're lively, and we put a lot of effort in them every day, and love our engaged readers.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in California, which is
Yes.
no. And is there anything you'd like to add?
I think you've done a great job covering the bases. I certainly hope that that the newest voters are engaged. It's your right and privilege as an American to get to vote. And as a journalist, I'm never going to tell you who I voted for, but I do vote. I think that's important for everybody to do. And there's so many elections. Also, there's obviously the presidential election every 4 years, which gets the most amount of voters in the United States. But then there's the midterm elections in the off years, and then there's always local elections. So, take a chance to vote for your city council person, your school board member. Those are the kind of things that really matter, and where, individual votes actually make a difference.
Yes, and I can personally attest to that. I've been in elections where 100 votes is the deciding factor. So, yes, definitely be engaged. Thank you so much for coming on. I do really appreciate the insight and the unique perspective. Of course, it was a pleasure. Feel free to come back anytime if you want to talk about California politics. Always doing something fun there. But no, thank you so much.
Yes. Well, thanks for hosting me. A great conversation, and hope that the listeners enjoy it.
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you, and take care.
Yes, you too.